Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's My Cames Recruitment Show, where, as you can see, we're talking about podcasting for recruiters and how you can use it to win clients, which is going to be fantastic. Now, we are joined, as you can see, with the number one podcaster for the mining sector, Rob Tyson. Hi, Rob. How are you doing today?
Yeah, doing great. Thanks you for inviting me on the show.
Yes, thank you very much for coming. And of course, we've got Mike, who I believe is filming in the studio today.
Check me out. Yeah, I'm in the studio today. Yeah, that's looking good actually, feeling good.
Feeling good, Lewis. Excellent. Okay. So, Mike, can you talk a little bit about why you wanted Rob to come on the show today?
Yeah, sure. Everyone, we believe that podcasting or broadcasting in general is a really great thing to do. It's got all sorts of benefits to it. I mean, we think you should live stream as well. Let's talk about that later, Rob. But whether you podcast or live stream, it's a brilliant way to get messages out there and achieve things, win clients and so on. And Rob, I wanted to come on the show because he is the number one podcaster in the mining industry. So he's achieved that. And I also know, because he's a client, that he uses his podcast to win clients and do all sorts of crazy things, which he's going to share with today. So I wanted him to come on the show and share all, and he said he would. So here he is. Now, quick introduction for Rob. He's a search consultant, works in the mining field. He works internationally across the world. His firm is, strange enough, Mining International, giving away quite a lot there with that name, Rob. But very successful and obviously a really successful podcaster as well. So the real deal there, Rob Tyson. Thanks for coming on the show, Rob.
No, I appreciate that.
Yes, it's going to be live. We're very excited about it. Okay, so Rob, to kick it off, just so that people kind of understand where you are with your podcast, can you give us some sort of statistics? Like, for example, how long have you been going? And like, firstly, what's your average number of downloads a month?
Yeah, certainly. So I launched the podcast in November 2018. So I've been running for about 4.5 years now. We do 2 episodes a week, Monday and a Thursday. On average, we're getting about 1,000 listeners per episode, which obviously I've built up over time. When I first launched, we were doing 1 show a week. And then because it became a lot more popular, we then extended it to 2 shows a week.
So let me just get this right then. You sit down twice a week with a guest, because you don't do shows on your own. It's just always with a guest. You sit down with a guest and talk to them for an hour or so about a particular subject or set of subjects. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. One other quick question on the data front as well. When you started, say the first 2 or 3 months, say, if you can remember back that far, how many downloads were you getting in those days?
You're probably looking at maybe 50, 100. I suppose it's being consistent, and over time, the numbers do grow. What I've just noticed more recently is when an episode goes out live, I probably get 300 or 400 that will listen to the episode in the first few days, and then the numbers grow over time. So as the podcast is sort of 6 months old, the numbers still grow. So it's like a back catalogue.
We find the same on our YouTube channel, actually, weirdly. It's the same thing. And sometimes someone watches it and they must mention it somewhere or something. You never really know, because you suddenly have a spike in numbers. You think, well, crikey, where did that come from?
Yeah.
No idea where. So someone must have mentioned it, but that is interesting.
Yeah. And I think sometimes it's if someone searches for my podcast and searches, or they want to hear about a guest, a particular CEO of a mining company, for instance, they would then go back to that particular episode, even if it was a year ago. Sometimes we do get CEOs that come on 2 or 3 times. So if they listen to the latest one, then they may go back a year to listen to what they said a year ago and see the difference and the journey that the company have been on and themselves.
Yeah. So it's interesting that because you're using your podcast not so much to educate, so much as, learn stuff or whatever, although elements of that come into it, I know, but actually it's to get whatever's in your guest's mind at that time, to get that out. It's not about the skills and experience necessarily. It's what's going on in their world or the experiences that they bring with them. It's more about that kind of a Michael Parkinson type interview, isn't it, really?
Yeah, so this is, I suppose, this is where I differentiate from a lot of the other podcasts and the video channels within the mining space. I get to know the guest. Obviously, being in recruitment, people buy from people. So my podcast really looks at the guest and gets to understand the guest. Look at one of my first questions is, can you tell us about your career and your background? So they rattle off 5 minutes of their career, explaining what they've done in their career before then we go into obviously talk about the company and about the anything about the company. So it's getting to know the guests, and I suppose any other platforms they wouldn't put all that information out there.
Can I just ask about that actually? So if I was going to come on your show, because I'm like big in mining, well, actually both my grandparents were miners, so that probably qualifies me. Anyway, if I came on the show, would the first time I speak to you be when we record the session, or would you talk to me beforehand, or what would happen?
No, I'll talk to you beforehand. So sometimes I'll approach them via email, ask them if they want to be a guest. Sometimes they may want to have a quick chat to understand a little bit more about the podcast if they haven't already listened to it. Quite a lot of people have listened to it, so they understand. And then obviously before we record, I normally have a 5 to 10 minute chat with them, ask them how business is, and anything really, just speak to them. And obviously at the back of my mind, I would obviously want to ask them about recruitment. I don't tend to always ask. I tend to ask questions around that, maybe what challenges they're facing in their business, and then obviously ask them a little bit about themselves, and just various questions before then we start recording.
Because when I went on Hisham Azouzi's podcast a couple of weeks back, by the way, if you don't listen to that, you should. It's brilliant. Not my episode necessarily, but Hisham's channel. And I was surprised because he did insist on a half an hour chat beforehand. And he was asking me all sorts of stuff, really. I mean, what is relevant to that? And a lot of it didn't use, but I could see when he was using it in the interview. And I thought the interview was so much richer because he did it really well, actually.
I might have to start my podcast a little bit earlier then, and have it a bit more structured where I'm asking a lot more questions. And then I tend to sometimes ask them questions after the podcast as well. Asking obviously certain questions they may have answered, and this could be about their company and then maybe their results, for instance. I then ask them questions after the podcast and delve into a little bit more information around that.
To say though on this, and this is an important point, I think. The most important thing is to produce content that your audience wants to consume, isn't it? I mean, let's face it. This is not the Rob Tyson show. Well, it kind of is really, but it's not the Mike Ames show either. Really, it's whatever people want to absorb, whatever they find interesting or useful or thought provoking. And so, how do you know what that is? Then how do you?
We've actually had a question asking this exact same thing. So how do you find?
Yeah. So I suppose
you
want to understand your audience, and I suppose if you're starting out, you're not necessarily always aware of what your audience is. I know a lot of my audience, and I don't get data on this. This is just the feedback that I get. Most of my audience are mining professionals within the industry, so they will come to me and ask if someone can speak about a particular commodity, for instance, or can you speak about a particular company? So that's when I would obviously reach out to them. Generally speaking, I would reach out to certain guests if I would want them on my show because I may have heard about them before, or may have seen them speak before. I know they can produce good content, so I would approach them. But then I've got 7 or 8 PR agencies that send me guests as well.
Okay.
So they will send me a guest to say that they're releasing some new results or they're going to be listed on the stock exchange. They want to promote their company. So they approach me, would you like to have this guest on the podcast? And obviously then we move.
I've got a question about that as well. We get approached fairly regularly by people who want to come on the show, but basically they want to come on the show and just promote their product. I mean, that's the bottom line really, which that's not what we do. You aren't allowed to promote your product when you come on. You can mention what you do something at the end, and that's fair play, I think, but we're not having just someone come on to talk about the bloody product the whole time. Do you get the same sort of thing where you think, well, I don't think you're going to be that interesting to the audience, really? Do you have to sift those out?
Yeah. So I get a lot of service providers that may have some new technology or some new product that they want to obviously bring into the mining industry. Depending on what it is, I may do. But when I started to get a lot more service providers coming into or approaching me to come onto the podcast, I thought about charging them. If
Oh,
they want to
really?
sell their product, I thought about charging them. So that's what. So last year I did start to charge some guests to come on my podcast to obviously promote. Obviously, their end goal is to promote their product or service. But I always say to the guests, I want some educational content around you coming on. It's not you just coming on to sell your product. I want some educational content around what your product can do for a company.
That's so interesting.
It's interesting because another thing that I get pushback on sometimes when I encourage people to do a show of their own, which we do a lot, is that, well, I'm not very interested. I've not got much to say. And in your case, I'm not saying you have or you haven't, but you just extract what your guests have, don't you? It's not about you. You're the conduit, if you like, on the show. You don't have to be sparkling conversation or know a load of things or impress people. You just have to get people on your show and then extract from them what they've got that your audience would find interesting. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah. So obviously I'm just the host, and I suppose I cheat a little bit in that way. I get the guests to send me the questions that they want me to ask them, because they want to put a certain amount of content out there. If I ask the questions, they're going to be very generalistic. If they send me the questions, then obviously it's more pinpointed to the information that they want to put out there. I will ask a few other questions besides those, but that's depending on what they're saying. If I feel the audience wants to know a little bit more about what they're saying, then I'll ask another question. But generally speaking, they send me 6 or 7 questions that they want me to ask them.
Okay, just got some questions. Sorry, before you.
We've had a really good question from Jack.
Okay.
We've had a couple, but they're kind of, and I will bring them up. They're relevant to what we're going to talk about in a second. But Jack's asked a question: was how do you gather feedback from your audience? Do you do any surveys or anything, or how do you figure out who people like, or do you just do it based off kind of views and stuff like that?
That's a good question, because I should be doing more of that. I do get feedback from people messaging me, people send me emails. When I go to conferences, again, I suppose now, because I've been doing this for 4.5 years, and because I put them onto YouTube as well, I do get recognized sometimes. So I get people coming up to me and asking me questions and asking me, can I come onto your podcast, or can you do a podcast with this particular company? So yeah, that's the sort of feedback I get. There's nothing, I haven't measured necessarily the information, the feedback that I'm getting. This has just been obviously built up over 3 or 4 years since I've been.
Just on that, and it's something me and Rob are tussling about at the moment. I'm sure we'll reach a reasonable conclusion at the end of it. And Kirsty's got a little announcement in a minute on this very subject, actually. I think if you do occasional live stream like this and then strip the audio off to put on your podcast, the benefit that you get from this is that we know who's opted to come on it because you attend, right? Click on an attend button, and we get other people commenting on it as well. So we kind of have a view of the kind of people that we have. So if we want to reach out to an audience, we can. It's relatively easy for us to say, well, you come to the show fairly often. Well, what do you get from it? And I do that a lot on a one-to-one basis. So we don't put surveys or anything out. Maybe we should. It's a good idea, actually. But what we do is we will ask people who I know listen to the show to see what they think about it, and are we getting the right guests? And we try and adjust things accordingly. So it's that feedback piece is a good idea, isn't it, Rob?
Yeah, certainly. I know you keep asking me to do that, and it is on my to-do list to do a live stream.
Move it higher, Rob. Move it higher.
So, but yeah, it's just a general feedback that I've been getting, and I do get quite a lot of emails. And even when I speak to the guests afterwards, like a few weeks later or a few months later, I do ask them. I said, "Oh, how was your episode received?" And they say, yeah, a few people contact me. They've listened to the show. Yeah. I've had someone even get a job with listening to the podcast, actually then applied to the company. There wasn't a job there, applied to the company and got a job, and then thanked me for interviewing the guest on the podcast because he wouldn't have known about the company.
That's amazing. Actually, that brings me to a question on it. And we are going to come to the announcement in a second, but have you ever won any work from your podcast, do you think, like directly through the podcast?
Yes, I have, but it's a case of a journey. So it's not a case of straight after the episode they want to sign me a retained assignment up. It is a journey. So obviously I interview guests that come on the show. I keep in contact with them, and it's just building that rapport up. So eventually, I suppose it's like the sales process. So I do win work from some of the guests, a small proportion of the guests that I have on the show.
Interesting. Okay, fantastic. Thank you. I'm sure everybody's interested. We've got some more questions coming up, particularly around sort of how you produce and promote the podcast. So we're going to come to that in a second. But Mike, first, should we tell people what our announcement is that we've been so annoying?
Well, let's go, Andy. It's not a big deal. I think we might have bigged it up more than...
We've over-egged the pudding a little bit.
I think we've over-egged the pudding quite a bit. Okay, right. So we're going to change the format. This is a 2-second thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to have the live stream, which is what you're listening and watching now, is going to become 45 minutes. It's going to be longer so that we can go deeper on the subjects. This is based on feedback that we've got, right? Because they want more time to ask questions and to explore things. But we're going to do it every 2 weeks, not every week. And then we're also going to strip the audio off that and put it onto our podcast as well. So if you want to listen, you absolutely can. And we'll be promoting that on through the emails and God knows what else. Just if you can hear some noise in the background, it's because people are just cutting our back lawn.
You
Perfect
can't hear
timing.
it. It's fine.
I know, brilliant. Anyway, then the other thing is, again, this is from feedback that we've had. Some people really like it when we just cover a little thing and focus on it, a little practical thing or something very specific. So we've got a new playlist on our YouTube channel called Ask Mike, 5 to 7 minutes on one topic. And you have to subscribe to get that. So there'll be another way. You just got to subscribe to get those. So what's next week's, Kirsty? Because we're going to do it every other week.
We're going to be doing about how you handle people who work for you that aren't like you, that aren't the same, don't have the same drive, don't have the same abilities that you do in your team, how you handle that as a leader, because it's something that we come across quite often. So that's going to be going out. So it's going to go out on the Thursday. So you're still going to get something from us every week. It's just the show is going to be every other week. And we're going to fill in with the Ask Mike. So to get that, if you want to go to our YouTube channel, which is here, I've put the link in here, and you can go and subscribe there, and that's where they will be. So it's very exciting. We're looking forward to it. It's an experiment. We'll see how we get on. Good.
Okay, let's press on, because I think people want to know. Or do you want to bring your questions up? Because we got to talk about how you use it, leverage it, how you actually use it to make money, directly or indirectly, which I think people want to know.
Yes. So we've had a couple of questions around that. So let's just let you answer that, Rob. How, from your point of view, how does this podcast, because it takes time and effort, and we're going to look at that in a second when it comes to production, how do you actually use it to make money if you're not getting direct clients from it?
Well, I suppose initially, and the whole reason why I started the podcast is when I started the podcasts weren't really too much out there, especially in the UK. In America and Canada, they were pretty well popular. So the whole reason for me starting the podcast wasn't necessarily financial. It was to get in front of CEOs of mining companies. And then obviously once I'm in front of them, obviously try and sell my services. So that was my initial, because I had a few guests ask me, so where do you make your money? And I sort of had to not say, because so I can obviously speak to you as a CEO. I'm just saying, I basically just said I just wanted to educate the mining community as a whole. It improves my branding as well and gets me obviously more known in the industry. But obviously as time's gone on and as I've built up more and more episodes, like I said, last year, because I had a lot of service providers coming to me, I thought then about charging guests a small fee, which is a small marketing fee, to promote their particular episode. So I had a small marketing fee, of which 25% of that fee I used as paid advertising to promote their podcast.
Interesting.
And then obviously the rest will come to me or to me to then obviously, because I have to, I outsource all the editing, which obviously we can speak about.
Yeah,
I outsource the editing, so that covers that cost. So that's what I started to do last year. I've had a change of heart now this year, in that I'm looking to get a sponsor for the podcast for the year. So I'm just in discussions with a few companies and putting a few things together to get a sponsor for the podcast for the year.
Okay, fantastic. I think that was a very good answer. So we've had a couple of questions. Oh, Mike, did you want to go on it?
Yeah, just to build on that, because I know we've talked about this a lot, and we are in a similar position in a sense that we've got a thing that goes out to our audience. But you get recognized at places, don't you? It's relatively easy for you to start a conversation with people because they've heard of you. They know a bit about you. They feel, I get this a lot. We went to the recruitment show recently, people talking to me like they know me, like I'm an old mate. And I don't know who they are really. But they're so used to seeing me on here that it's kind of got that first level of familiarity in place, which makes building the relationship and eventually making money so much easier. Do you find the same thing?
Yeah, definitely. And obviously, as time goes on, I get recognised more. But also, my business card. So my business card on the back of it has got my logo. Now, everyone seems to recognise my logo more, my podcast logo more than my company logo.
Oh wow!
So as soon as I give my podcast, as soon as I give my business card to someone, I actually turn it over on the back and show them my podcast logo, and straight away they go, "Oh yeah, I've seen that. I recognise
Oh,
that."
I know you. Okay, that's so interesting because I've got a really good question here from Gavin as well, because obviously we've been talking about clients, but recruitment is an interesting industry because you have two sets of clients. So does it help you to get high quality candidates as well?
Yeah, certainly. Obviously, I mean, I had a few emails this morning saying, "I've listened to your podcast. I know you're a recruiter. Can you help me?" So I do get obviously candidates come through. Obviously, I would say majority of the listeners are potential candidates because they're people within the mining industry. So again, I suppose if you're looking to start a podcast, always think about who your listeners are and who your audience are. My audience is the mining community.
Let me just say this one thing on this because it's something that I want Rob to do, whether it's a live show or whatever, it doesn't make any difference. If we ran a webinar for you, Rob, and obviously for webinars, you have to register for them, but we publicized it in the same way that to the same people that you publicize your show to, these people would come out of the woodwork because we'd know who they were, because we need to know who they were, because they'd have to put their details into the registration on the webinar. So you can build up an audience through a podcast if that's what you want, but you do have to have some kind of thing, an event where people can put their hands up and say, yeah, okay, well, look, I'd like that. So here I am, this is me. And I think if you do that from time to time, and even if you do one a year, you can really understand the kind of people, and then you can accelerate that process of building relationships and placing them or doing business with them. So I'll be talking about that very soon.
It's sort of that link between the marketing of a podcast to the sales
of
a webinar, isn't it?
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
the switch between the two. Okay,
now, we're going to run out of time, I think, to get the questions in. So should we, I don't know how many questions we got coming through. Should we carry on with the rest of the and then do the questions at on the hour at 1 o'clock?
I think some of the questions sort of lead in nicely to what we want to speak about, because the next section is sort of around how you promote the podcast. So we've got a question here from Paul, which is, how do you promote the podcast in order to gain new listeners? Because obviously you've gone from, at the beginning, 4 or 5 years ago, like 50 people to now 1,000. So that's quite a big gain in a fairly small period of time. How have you done that?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I just used LinkedIn. I mean, there's obviously a lot more you can always do. I promote the podcast on obviously LinkedIn. We also have a YouTube channel, and we promote the podcast on other social media channels. Every time I do a podcast, and at the end, I always thank the audience, ask the audience to sort of spread the word, pass the episode on, share the episode with friends, family, etc. as well. So again, that's, I suppose, a little bit of a small proportion, but I suppose it's like anything. Over time, those numbers just keep increasing. There's a lot more obviously I can do around advertising, but obviously my main business is recruitment. But we do advertise each episode across all the social media platforms.
If you produce good quality stuff on balance, because everybody has a duff episode from time to time, but if you consistently produce really good quality stuff, people will come. We on average now, we have about 3 times as many people on average that attend the show than we had a year ago.
Yeah.
Right. So
that is a question as well, Rob. Did you find that growth from 50 to 1,000 kind of gradual, like a straight line, or did you find that it sort of snowballed at a certain point when
sometimes it snowballs and comes down. Again, it could be seasons of the year. I mean, mining, obviously, and I'm work internationally, so certain countries, for instance, stop mining during certain periods of time, so they may not listen to that episode. So it wasn't a straight up curve. It is up and down. And I'll probably say at the moment my numbers are slightly off than what they were, say, maybe end of last year, beginning of this year. What that is, I don't know. Maybe because there might be other competition in the marketplace. There might be other mining podcasts out there. I know, looking at when I started the podcast, there was probably 6 or 7 other podcasts out there. Now there's over 100. So there's obviously a lot more competition now for that space.
Wow. Sorry, somebody's just having a quick problem with the live stream, so I'm just sending them the YouTube link. Mike, do you want to ask maybe about Rob, how he keeps the consistency? I know you've mentioned it before that you post regularly. How do you keep that consistent presence?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, Rob, because you said before it's really important to do that.
Yeah, consistency. And again, so before I started the podcast, I actually did a podcast course. They showed me how to, or gave me ideas, shows how to launch, how to do all the background stuff, which again, I outsourced that. So all I do is just do the recording. But being consistent is, my episode goes out every Monday and a Thursday. So it's like if you're watching EastEnders or Coronation Street, which I don't, you know when they're coming out. You know when each episode's coming out. It's every certain day. That's what my podcast is. So everyone will wake up on a Monday morning who's a subscriber and can't wait to see what guest is going to be announced.
That's very important. Day. Before we started doing this, someone told me that be like the telly. They know if they tune in at that time, that's what they're going to get. Interestingly, as well, just allied to that, someone, when we started it up, someone said treat it like the BBC, because when the BBC started in the 1920s, this was their mantra: you are supposed to inform, educate, and entertain. And personally, I try and stick to that for our show. You don't have to do all three in the same show, although it helps if you can. But that's not a bad mantra to adopt for yourself if you decide to do a podcast.
Okay, fantastic. So we're come to the end of our time, unfortunately. Rob, you've been so great so far. So in a second, I'm going to come to you and ask, as per usual, for your top tip about what somebody should do if they want to get started in podcasting. But before then, Mike, it's not going to be next week, but the next show, which is in 2 weeks, what are we going to be talking about?
Okay, so this is a really important one. And I always say that, I know, but there's only 4 reasons, 4 obstacles to stop people from changing their business, to grow it to where they want it to be. And it's not about recruitment. All businesses have these problems in place, these obstacles. I'm going to put them in the promotion for this so you can read what they are. But you need to overcome all 4. So 3 out of 4 is not good enough. You need to overcome all 4. And then you can accelerate at a tremendous rate. And I'm going to tell you what they are. And we have 45 minutes to do it. So looking forward to that.
It's going to be very, very exciting. It's going to be a whole new show. Okay. So, Paul, as usual, I know you've watched the show and regular watchers will know that we come to you now.
Paul,
and we ask for...
Paul.
What did I say?
Paul. I could be called Paul if you want.
It's because I've been speaking. I've done it again. I'd always do this with the wrong name. It's because somebody's been commenting.
I could have let that go, but I didn't.
I'm so sorry, Rob. Someone's got my brain can't.
I would have corrected you anyway.
I'm so sorry, Rob. I'm so sorry. Right. Okay, so as per usual, Rob, if somebody is watching the show, they know that we ask for one tip that somebody does, that's going to make this process easier for you. What would your top tip be?
I suppose, obviously, depending on what sector that you're in. If you're looking to start a podcast, look at other podcasts that are in your particular sector, listen to a few of them, take some good bits that you like from them, but also then look at what you can do differently to those other podcasts, so your differential. So I think that would be a good tip to look at. But obviously have a look at all the podcasts and take the good bits, and then add another good bit that's going to be differential.
That's really crucial. That leave it on the screen for a second, Kirst. Particularly those outside your industry. There's a thing called cross-pollination that you can use in business generally, and you basically go to a sector that does something nothing to do with you, and you lift that thing that they do. You kind of adapt it to your world and plop it in. Really, it's cross-pollination. It's a thing. You can do cross-pollination very much so with podcasts. Just go and listen to them and understand what they're talking about, how they structure it, their format, and lift what you think is right for them. And then, of course, you can listen, as you say, which is important. What's everybody else doing in your space? And just do something different. It's not difficult to create a podcast that's original if you put the graft in, is it?
Yeah. I mean, I started to do that when I first started my podcast, but maybe I should look at my own tip, because I should listen to some other podcasts and see if I can take some bits and pieces out of other podcasts and try and, I suppose, improve mine.
Yeah, that's what I really love about a lot of what you say today, Rob, is that what you did at the beginning worked then, but you've continually sort of adapted and changed and grown the podcast, and it does become its own thing, which is a bit like why we're sort of morphing the Mars show as well. So I really appreciate that what you do once isn't necessarily what it takes. It takes a little bit of work, but it does bring you big results. So
yeah, I was just about to say, and when I first started, I was actually doing face-to-face interviews with microphones and a recorder. Now everything's done over Zoom, so that's completely different now.
I know we need to end now, but then you basically send that off to somebody, presumably abroad or something, and they just edit it.
No, it's locally. They put it onto a platform. They write show notes. It's the company that I did my training with. So I send it to them. They do all the editing, make the best recording they can, cut out all background noises, cut any edits if they need anything out, write some show notes, contact details of the guest, etc. And then they put it onto the platform, a platform, which then we take the information from that platform and put it across all the other social media channels.
Wow. Cool. Okay. All right. Fantastic. So I would like to thank everybody for watching and for the comments today. It's always great. Really appreciate when everyone gets some good questions in there. So thank you very much. I, of course, want to say thank you to Rob, not Paul, Rob, for being here today. Rob, thank you so much. You've been really added a lot of value today. So I really appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Yeah, and appreciate you inviting me on the show. I enjoyed it.
And getting your name right. And then, of course, we've got to say thank you to Mike. Thank you very much, Mike, for
you don't have to if you don't want to. I mean, just whatever.
You know, because you made my point wrong earlier, didn't you? Which is horrible. So
yeah, I did that on purpose, because you were getting a bit uppity. So
that's what it was. Okay, so thank you very much to everybody for watching, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Well, indeed.